Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's jump right in. We are currently looking at a massive paradigm shift in the global AI race, and honestly, it's one that might actually end America's undisputed lead in artificial intelligence. You see, this isn't just your typical story about a rival catching up. It's a fundamental rewriting of the rules of the whole game. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this shockwave, think back to about 18 months ago, when DeepSeek released their R1 thinking model. The stock market literally dropped by 20% almost overnight. Why? Well, because up until that exact moment, the whole world basically assumed you needed hundreds of billions of dollars to build a model that could genuinely think and reason at the frontier level. DeepSeek's R1 proved that assumption completely wrong. It was this massive wake-up call that extreme efficiency could actually rival brute financial force. Let's look at this timeline for a second. Since May 2023, back when GPT-4 was the undisputed king, there's been this constant ebb and flow between US and Chinese frontier labs. We saw the US push ahead with the first thinking models, like O1 Preview in late 2024. Then, just a really short time later, DeepSeek R1 closed that gap almost completely. Historically, the US labs would shoot ahead, and then Chinese open source would play catch-up. But with DeepSeek's newest release, V4, that predictable pattern is breaking entirely. Section 1. The Shockwave. DeepSeek V4. V4 steps up to the plate and immediately matches the US frontier with a 1 million token context limit. It boasts a massive 1.66 trillion total parameter architecture. But what's really fascinating here is the mixture of experts approach. Only 49 billion of those parameters are active at any given time, meaning it only runs the specific small parts of the model needed for your prompt. It was trained on an astonishing 33 trillion tokens of data. But the absolute most disruptive bullet point on this list? It's completely open source and open weights. Anyone can just download it, inspect it, and use it. Section 2. Mechanics of disruption. Efficiency over hardware. So, the US strategy basically relies on throwing immense compute power, top-tier NVIDIA chips, and hundreds of billions of dollars at the problem. But because of expert controls, Chinese labs don't have direct access to those top-tier chips. They're literally working with nerfed GPUs. But here is the profound irony of the whole situation. That constraint bred creativity. The expert controls essentially forced Chinese engineers to innovate, resulting in incredible algorithmic unlocks that make training and running these models hyper-efficient. They are quite literally doing more with vastly less. And what's super interesting is how transparent they are about it. In their highly detailed open-source white paper, they straight up admit they have high-end compute concerns. They acknowledge that their current service capacity is pretty limited right now. However, they also mention they're launching 950 supernodes later this year. So what does that mean? It means their already incredibly low prices are expected to drop even further very soon. Section 3. The Distillation Attack Debate. Now, you've probably heard this massive buzzword lately, a distillation attack. This is when an entity systematically extracts question and answer pairs from a top-tier competitor's model and uses that stolen data to train their own system. Recently, the US government, specifically Director Michael Kratsios, stated that foreign entities are running industrial-scale distillation campaigns to extract American breakthroughs from top models like Claude and ChatGPT. But looking objectively at Anthropic's own security report, the numbers kind of tell a different story. When we break down the supposed distillation attacks by Chinese AI labs, Minimax had 13 million exchanges, Moonshot had 3.4 million, but DeepSeek, only 150,000. Many industry experts argue that 150,000 exchanges is nowhere near enough to steal a frontier model's brain. In fact, it looks a lot more like standard benchmark comparisons. Just checking how your model stacks up against the competition. When you pair this incredibly low number with the fact that DeepSeek published a thoroughly detailed white paper explaining their unique algorithmic breakthroughs, the massive data theft narrative becomes heavily debated. Section 4. The Enterprise Calculus. Open versus closed source. Stepping out of the lab for a second, let's look at the MMLU Pro benchmark, which tests raw knowledge and reasoning. DeepSeek V4 Pro is just slightly behind the absolute top US models, like GPT-5.5 and Opus 4.7 in raw intelligence. It's right up there, going toe-to-toe with the closed-source giants. It might not be number one, but it is remarkably close. But here's the major problem for the United States: the cost. US frontier models are incredibly expensive, hovering around $30 per million output tokens. Meanwhile, DeepSeek's smaller workhorse model, V4 Flash, costs literal pennies per million tokens. The gap in price is astronomical compared to that tiny gap in performance we just looked at. So I want you to put yourself in the shoes of an enterprise CEO. Unless your company is doing absolute cutting-edge scientific research or trying to crack the hardest coding problems on Earth, why would you pay massive premiums for a closed U.S. frontier model when a vastly cheaper, highly capable alternative exists? For the vast majority of business use cases, you simply wouldn't. The calculus for these companies becomes incredibly obvious. DeepSeek offers nearly state-of-the-art capabilities for a fraction of the cost. But beyond just the money, it's open source. That means enterprise companies can take this model, host it privately, securely fine-tune it on their own internal data, and have precise control over how it operates. They aren't renting a black box from a U.S. lab, they own the engine. Section 5. The Geopolitical Fallout. And this leads us to what might be the most critical part of this explainer. Right now, the United States is undertaking the fastest infrastructure build-out in human history, pouring trillions of dollars into data centers, power grids, and AI chips. All of that investment fundamentally requires a massive return. But if enterprise businesses decided simply cheaper and more efficient to build their internal systems on Chinese open-source technology instead, the return on that massive U.S. infrastructure bet could collapse entirely. Furthermore, we have to consider the cultural impact. Think back to the social media era because those platforms originated in the US, American companies largely controlled the global narrative and the rules of engagement. If we flip that on its head for the AI era, relying heavily on Chinese open-source foundation models introduces a severe risk. It opens the door for a foreign power to dictate the core architecture, influencing what these foundational AI models can and cannot say across the global economy. So, how does the US navigate this? To survive this paradigm shift, the source suggests a two-step approach. Step 1, the U.S. has to aggressively embrace and fund high-tier open-source development, matching the freedom that DeepSeek offers. Step 2, U.S. frontier labs must drastically improve their algorithmic efficiency to significantly lower the cost of their closed models. They basically have to make it financially viable for enterprise businesses to actually want to use them over foreign alternatives. I'll leave you with this final thought to take away from our explainer today. We are essentially watching a masterclass in efficiency battling raw capital. If extreme efficiency, open access, and unbeatable prices ultimately win out in the enterprise market, what exactly does the future of the American tech monopoly look like? Think about that as you watch the AI landscape evolve over the coming months. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the algorithms that shape our world.